Good afternoon. Good afternoon. This is Valley Beth Shalom, live and online, and I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to Lunch and Learn. Good afternoon. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein, and this is Valley Beth Shalom, live and online, and it's my pleasure to welcome you once again to our afternoon Lunch and Learn. I hope that you're well and enjoying this Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel Independence Day, a very special day in the life of the Jewish people, the 72nd birthday of the state of Israel. We have returned to sovereignty, and returning to sovereignty carries with it a remarkable set of responsibilities, of new needs, and of opportunities to live Jewish lives in ways that Jews have not lived for more than 1,800 years. And when we consider the fact that Israel is a representation of two great impulses. One is the impulse to protect the life of the Jewish people, and the other is the impulse to of course, to protect the dream of the state of Israel, the dream that is Israel. We have and the gap between them, between the dream and the reality, puts us right here in the study of the biblical prophets, because the biblical prophets, more than anyone else, have given us the opportunity to experience that dream and to articulate the great ethical dream of the Jewish people. And it's the contrast between dream and reality that animates the prophet. And it's the contrast between dream and reality that animates so much of our own discourse about Israel and about its future. So I welcome you. I hope it's been a very good day. I hope you're taking very good care of yourself. And I hope that you're making it through this time of crisis with friends about you and with connections online and connections across the country. Hope you've been watching all the ceremonies of Yom HaAtzmaut. So let's return to the biblical prophets. Please take a Bible. Any Bible will do. I use the Tanakh that's put out by the Jewish Publication Society, but any Bible will do. Find the book of Amos, which is among the prophets, the classical prophets. The classical prophets begin with Isaiah, and then the book of Jeremiah, then the book of Ezekiel, and then you'll find an anthology of 12 shorter prophets, shorter prophetic books, rather. They're not short prophets. And the second one of them is Amos. And that will be our topic for today, as it was last week. Now, last week I set out what I thought were the principal social environmental factors that gave rise to classical prophecy. Number one was the rise of empire. The fact that the people Israel created a substantial kingdom and a substantial regional power under David and Solomon, but that was only because there was a gap in the lives of the two great empires of the region: Mesopotamia on the north and the east, and Egypt on the south and the west. In the time of the prophets, by the 7th century BCE, 8th century BCE, those empires are rising again. And the task of figuring out how to reconcile the cognitive dissonance between our own self-image as God's chosen people and the empirical fact that we are a marginal people living between two great empires, how the two great empires and our vulnerability to their power is going to affect our self-image as a people, is one of the topics that the prophets are going to take up. The second big issue has to do with the internal life of the people Israel. Now, the kingdom splits after Solomon. The southern kingdom is capitaled in Jerusalem and ruled by a descendant of David. The northern kingdom is capitaled in Samaria and ruled by a whole host of different kings who take power through coup d'etat and take power sometimes through heredity. But it's the northern kingdom that really prospers. And the southern kingdom sort of languishes economically and politically. In the northern kingdom, which is where we're located today with the prophet Amos, the northern kingdom prospers, and the northern kingdom develops an urban culture. And an urban culture carries a set of moral challenges. And the prophets, you'll see in a moment, the prophet Amos is village a village guy. He comes from a small farming village in the south. And he walks into this great metropolis of Samaria. And he sees the effects of urban life. He sees the stratification of rich against poor. He sees the anonymity of urban life, crime, prostitution, all of the invisibility, the social invisibility of certain classes of people. And he's just shocked by this. It shocks his sense of covenantal morality. It shocks his sense of values to see human beings treated like this. In the village culture that he comes from, human beings are cherished because everybody knows each other. In the village culture, everyone has a role and a place. But in urban life, as all of us who live in cities know, it doesn't work that way. In urban life, a human being lives a life and can pass away and nobody can notice. It could just very well be that nobody notices. There are people who are thrown away by the culture. And when the prophet sees this, he's enraged. He's outraged. And he doesn't understand why nobody else sees what he sees. We'll come back to that point in a moment. The third social principle, the social environmental issue, has to do with the mixing of faiths. In order to preserve their political autonomy, the kings of Israel married into the royal families of the local kingdoms, the local city-states. The way that you create an alliance is by marrying the prince of one state to the princess of another. Well, those princesses come to live in Samaria and they bring their gods. And bringing their gods, they create an avenue, literally an avenue of temples of all of these foreign gods. And the prophet sees these and sees how much the worship of foreign gods has infiltrated into the life of the people. And he is outraged by this. Partly it's that political issue of political alliances. Partly it's the landscape. One can make a very good case that geography is destiny. In southern Israel, where Jerusalem is located, you get rain in the winter, and the wadis fill up with water, and the cisterns that are dug under cities fill up with water, and the aquifer fills up with water. But it's a very dry climate and a sort of arid geography or topography, and things don't change very much. There are rocks. There are very few trees in southern Israel, but there are rocks. Things are made out of rock, and things that are made out of rock don't change. Rocks don't change that much, or they change so very slowly that we can't see them. But in the north of Israel, it's very fertile. It's very fertile. It's fertilized by rainwater. Now, we've pointed this out before. The land of Israel has no great rivers. Every great civilization has rivers. Mesopotamia has the Tigris and Euphrates, the Nile in Egypt, the Yangtze in China, the Mississippi in America. But the land of Israel has no rivers. There is a river called the Jordan River, which is a sorry excuse for a river. I mean, it's in some places, I suppose some times of year and in some places you get a pretty good flow. But most of the year, it's a pretty bad excuse for a river. I live in Los Angeles, and we have a thing called the Los Angeles River. And like the Jordan River, it's a pretty bad excuse for a river. You depend upon rainfall. And if it rains, you eat. And if it doesn't rain, you starve. And so this principle of vulnerability and dependency is built into Israelite culture. And Israelite culture adopted this pathos of being vulnerable and dependent. That's why we have a festival in the early fall called Sukkot. Sukkot was the Canaanite rain festival, and in fact, we maintain a little bit of that because we recite a prayer for Geshem on the days of Sukkot. Ancient Israel had a better way of doing that. They began to adopt the Canaanite ways of worship. For the Canaanites, the sky god was Baal, represented by a bull. He was the male principle of the universe. Excuse me. And the earth god was Asherah, Ishtar, or eventually Esther, represented the female principle of the universe. And it was the combination of the two, of Baal above and Ishtar below, that gave you fertility. And so what ancient Israelites would do is participate in Canaanite rituals in which they would carry out ritualized acts of sex in order to encourage the gods to rain fertility upon the land. And this became pretty popular. It became so popular that every time we have excavated a northern Israelite city, we have found figurines of Baal and Ishtar in every house, in every Israelite city. It wasn't, how do you put this? It wasn't seen as a betrayal of the God of Israel. The God of Israel was still the God. But this was a sort of hedging of the bets, and it was an adopting of local custom. I suppose in our world, you could see this as Halloween or New Year's Eve. I mean, Halloween, which begins as a Christian festival, it's the All Hallows Eve. And New Year's Eve, of course, is the festival of the Lord's bris, of his circumcision. And yet we've adopted these customs, secularized them, and participate in them in a kind of free and easy way. There are a lot of families in my community that are now putting up Hanukkah lights on their house, blue and white lights on the house during Hanukkah. No one sees this as a betrayal of Jewishness. No one saw Baal and Ishtar worship as a betrayal of loyalty to the God of Israel, except for the prophets. Except for the prophets. And it was the prophets who demanded a purity of worship. That's what we hear in Amos. We saw that in Elijah when we looked at the Elijah stories over Pesach. When Elijah says to the people of Israel, how long will you be hopping? The word is piseach, like Pesach, to be hopping from one faith to another, from one loyalty to another, from devotion to one God to devotion to another. Choose the God that's your God and worship that God. Ideological purity is the provenance of prophets and teachers of faith. Most people are more casual about this stuff. Most people are much more casual about this. And that's what happened in ancient Israel. So these three factors, urbanization and the syncretism, the mixing of faiths, and the rise of the empire, give us the external environmental impetus for the rise of classical prophecy. I want to raise three more issues today, which are internal to the Jewish people. Issue number one has to do with the issue of Israelite exceptionalism. The Israelites were told from the very beginning that you are the treasured possession of the God of the universe. Well, they took that seriously, and they believe that God is going to protect us. We'll see this later on. We get to Jeremiah. They really believed that God would protect them, that somehow being an Israelite meant that that nothing could happen to you, that you weren't subject to the moral criticism that one might project onto outside kingdoms. So what we have here is an attitude that we are exempt, that we are protected, that we are outside of the flow of events, that nothing bad can happen to us. And the prophet is going to come along and say, on the contrary, and we'll see this very strongly reflected in the text of Amos, because you're an Israelite, because you're covenanted, you have a higher degree of responsibility. A greater degree of vigilance is necessary. God is watching you much more carefully. And the punishments that will come to you will be much more gruesome than the punishments that come to your neighboring kingdoms, because you were warned, because something greater is expected of you. This has a lot of relevance for today, for Yom HaAtzmaut, for the day of Israeli independence, because the question is, do Jews in Israel and does the state of Israel have to abide by a higher moral standard? And who says? And sometimes we get angry when the New York Times betrays a sort of double standard. It judges Israel on a higher moral standard than, let's say, it judges local countries and kingdoms. When Israel, more is demanded of Israel than is demanded of, say, Egypt or Jordan or any of these other kingdoms. But the question is, but this has always been part of us. Are we expected to live by a higher standard? That's question number one. Question number two. There was a belief that the covenant with God was unconditional. That the covenant, having been made with Abraham, having been renewed at the time of Moses, having been renewed again at the time of Joshua, having been renewed with King David, that the covenant was an unconditional covenant. God would never reject his people, ever. And therefore, there was really nothing you could do that would ultimately alienate you from God, even if you violated all the laws and traditions of the covenant. Well, the question is that true? And the prophets are going to come along and say, no. The covenant begins with a very simple two-letter word, if. If you obey, if you live a life of righteousness, if you are a vessel for justice in the world, if you carry God's word into the world, then you live as God's people. But if you refuse to do that, just having been born into this people and carrying the label of Israel doesn't make you this exceptional person. And this is going to be one of the issues that the prophet raises. Third issue, which is related to the urbanization issue that I mentioned a moment before. As we read the prophets, you're going to see that they are not complaining about gross moral misconduct. They're not talking about atrocity. It's not that the lives of Jews or Israelites, rather, in northern Israel or in southern Israel at this time were so morally deficient, so morally retrograde. It's that the prophet carries an exquisite sensitivity to the everyday immorality that all of us who live in cities have come to accept as normal. There's things we come to accept as normal. If a prophet lived today, he wouldn't be talking about gross immorality. He would want to know how we can walk by a homeless person on the street and not feel the heartbreak. How we know that there are public schools that are dilapidated and dysfunctional and not feel the heartbreak. How we know that there is poverty, an income inequality and disparity, and not feel an outrage by this. In other words, there's nothing in ancient Israel that we don't have today that people weren't living with, and they knew it was there. It's just that you become accustomed to this. But the prophet is exquisitely sensitive. You know, they say that my dog can hear tones that I can't hear, so you have a dog whistle. There are people who have sensitivities to things. They can hear better, they can see better, they can taste better. The prophet has an exquisite, ultra-fine moral sensitivity. He can hear the cry of the homeless mother. He can hear the sigh of a homeless and destitute father. He can feel the frustration of the abandoned child. He feels what goes on in the society as a personal pain, as a personal affront. You won't understand the prophets unless you understand that piece of it. So, if a friend came to visit Los Angeles, I would take him to the Getty Museum and look at the exquisite view and the beautiful gardens. The prophet would want us to go down to the ghetto of South Central and see the brokenness of human lives. We just see different things. And that's what makes a prophet the prophet. So let's take a look at Amos. So Amos is a farmer, comes from the south in Tekoa, comes up from his village, and he comes to the town of Samaria. And standing in the square of Samaria, he begins to preach. And he's preaching to these people. And he talks about all of the neighboring kingdoms. And I imagine a crowd growing around this street preacher. And people cheering him on and egging him on. And the structure of each of his messages is, for 3 transgressions for so-and-so, for 4 I will not forgive them. And he starts out by preaching against Damascus, and he preaches against Gaza, and he preaches against Tyre, and he preaches against Edom, and he preaches against Ammon, and he preaches against Moab. And each time he preaches this message, more people come over, and more people are cheering for him, and they're egging him on, and they're saying, preach it, prophet, preach it. We can't stand those people. They're disgusting. And soon there's this very large crowd. And then he says, I'm in verse 4 of chapter 2, for 3 transgressions of Judah, for 4 I will not revoke it. And the crowd says, yeah, preach it. And then all of a sudden somebody says, wait a minute. Did he just say Judah? I have cousins who live in Judah. I have friends who live in Judah. They're Israelites like us. And now this crowd is silent because they didn't expect this, because they believe that their moral fate is separated from the moral fate of other peoples. And so he says, no, the only separation between your moral fate and the fate of other nations is that God is more critical of you, demands more of you, expects more of you, and will punish you more harshly. So for 3 transgressions of Judah, for 4 I will not revoke it, because they have spurned the teaching of the Lord and have not observed his laws. They've beguiled with delusions, and after which their fathers walks, I will send fire down on Judah, and it shall devour the fortress of Jerusalem. And now the crowd is quiet. And now the prophet delivers the coup de grace. For 3 transgressions of Israel, for 4 I will not revoke it. And now the crowd says, but that's us. How could you preach against us, prophet? We're not like these pagan peoples. We're different. And the prophet says, yes, you're right. God expects much, much, much more of you. Now listen to what he castigates. Listen to what he preaches against. Because they've sold for silver those whose cause was just. So the first thing is the corruption of a court system, the perversion of justice, that human beings are not equal in the eyes of the law. The rich get a better deal than the poor. And those whose cause was just, and the needy for a pair of sandals. That you buy off the poor, or rather you corrupt the situation, and the poor have nothing. You who trample the heads of the poor into the dust of the ground, and make the humble walk a twisted course. Father and son go to the same girl. That's a marvelous image. Brutal. That there's so little moral sensitivity that a man, invites his son to go and make use of a prostitute, of a woman, that they degrade a woman together, and there's no shame of doing this in front of your son, in front of your father. And the using of a woman, there's no shame in that. There's no shame in seeing that she's a human being in need. And profane my holy name. And now it gets worse, because the thing the prophet's going to hate the most, the very most, is that all of this public immorality, the poverty, the injustice, the perversion, the obtuseness, the deceit, all of it's done with the blessings of the cult. That is, the priests who worship God, they bless all of this because it's their donors after all. You can't say anything bad about them, right? They recline by every altar on garments taken in pledge. That's a little complicated. There's a very specific law that you're not to take the garment of a workman at night as a pledge against a loan that you made to him. You're not to take the garment of the widow. Why? Because it's all they have. It's all that protects them. It's what they sleep in at night. You don't take the garment of a poor person as a collateral against the loan. But these people have ignored that law. They take everything of the poor. And then they take the garment, and here's the game. They take the garment of the poor. They go to the altar. They have a picnic in front of the altar, lying on the garment of a poor person. You get it? That's the worst sin you can commit. How many different sins can you commit in one act? That's the point. And drink in the house of their God, which is illegal. And wine bought with fines they imposed. Yet I destroyed the Amorites before them, whose stature was like cedars and stout as an oak, destroying the boughs above and his trunk below. And I brought you up from Egypt, and I led you through the wilderness to possess the lands of the Amorites. And I raised prophets and the Nazarites from your young men. Is it not so? But you made the Nazarite. The Nazarite's a person who takes upon a special vow of abstinence, but you corrupted them. You made the Nazarite drink wine and ordered the prophet not to prophesy. So what's going to happen to you? I will do to you what I did to the peoples who lived in your land before you got there. I will destroy you. And the wagon, I will slow your movements as the wagon is slowed, and when it's full with grain, flight shall fail the swift, the strong shall find no strength, the warrior shall not save his life, the bowman not hold his ground, the fleet-footed not escape, the horseman nor save his life, even the most stout-hearted warrior shall run away unarmed this day. You will suffer for these sins, because the land, Leviticus teaches that the land has a moral sensitivity. And if you violate the moral sensitivity of the land, you will be destroyed on the land like those who were living there before you got there. Listen to the first words of chapter 3. Hear this word, O people Israel, thus that the Lord has spoken concerning you, concerning the whole family that I brought up from the land of Egypt. You alone have I singled out of all the families of the earth. That's Israelite exceptionalism. But listen to the next line. That is why I called you to account for all your iniquities. You're going to pay. So your exceptionalism just raises the expectation level. That's what we expect of you. Now, we don't want the New York Times telling us how we should behave. And we certainly don't want the New York Times judging when we make a decision to protect ourselves in a very, very, very bad neighborhood. But we do that for ourselves. And it's very important that the Jewish people not lose this internal language of moral expectation. My mother had this down pat. My mother raised 4 boys, and we would beat the crap out of each other. It was terrible. And my mother would yell at us and scream at us, and sometimes she'd pretend she was going to hit us. She never did. But my mother had a particular way of doing this. At one point or another, she would lower her voice. She'd look at us and she'd say, boys, you're better than that. You're better than that. And how do you argue with that? And at that, we would drop our weapons and drop our animosity. The prophet's saying this again to us. I expect something higher from you. God expects something higher from you because you're better than that. That's your role in the world. Maybe we're not going to be a light among the nations because the nations don't want to hear from us. But we know that we live a higher moral life. And when we talk about the state of Israel, I think it's important to remember that the state of Israel has this as part of its ethos, part of its conversation. Its internal conversation is always, but we're a Jewish state, and therefore more is expected of us. Now, the prophet goes on a sort of tear, pointing this out to the people and what's going to happen to them if they don't change. One of the most wonderful scenes begins in chapter 4. Now, in my imagination, I'll add this if it's okay with you. He goes to the women's club. You know how schnapsy neighborhoods have women's clubs? It's where nice women go for a luncheon, to play cards. He shows up in a women's club. And he's an unkempt, foul-smelling, raggedly dressed farmer from the South. And he walks into the women's club of Samaria. And you can imagine the scene when this large man walks into the women's club in the middle of a luncheon, and he steps up on a chair and he begins preaching to these fine women who were dressed in their lovely clothes and adorned with their beautiful jewels and their wonderful coiffure, their beautiful hair. And he is this unkempt, ragged man. And he says to them, chapter 4, look at chapter 4. Hear this word, you cows of Bashan, on the hill of Samaria, who defraud the poor and rob the needy, who say to your husband, bring and let's carouse. By my Lord God swears by his holiness. Behold, days are coming upon you when you will be carried off in baskets, and to the last one in fish baskets, and taken out of the city, each one through a breach straight ahead, and flung on the refuse heap. You'll pay for this. You'll pay for the everyday common rhythm of immorality that has become part of your society. Now, let's ask the question. Is he talking about a punishment from on high? Which is one way to read this. That he believes that there's a God who is actively involved in history, that a God who rewards and punishes. And for violating the covenant, the people of Israel will suffer the pain of God's punishment. And it will be a punishment in recompense for that, in response to their immorality. Or if one isn't so theologically engaged, is he talking about consequences? Is he saying that there are certain rules which govern societies? And when those rules are violated, societies rot from the inside and they weaken and they become vulnerable both to outside invasion and from inner collapse. And is he saying to us that it's not that there's a God in heaven who's going to cast down fire and brimstone or bring an enemy from outside that to destroy you, but rather that with sufficient income inequality and disparity of wealth, with sufficient poverty, when you build a large underclass of people who were poverty stricken, then the society can no longer muster sufficient solidarity to defend itself against enemies from outside, nor can it maintain a sufficient sense of social unity to maintain itself from within, and societies collapse. Societies collapse. So you can read it either way. I mean, the prophet is certainly speaking in the language of theology. Thus says the Lord, this is what the Lord will do. But you can equally read it the other way, that there are rules in history, and that rules in history must be obeyed. And it might take generations before those rules, as it were, assert themselves. Empires and great civilizations don't collapse overnight. Very few of them do, at least. But that collapse they do because they fail the test of maintaining sufficient social solidarity, maintaining a test of social morality, and therefore they crumble from within, become vulnerable from enemies from without. That's the great scary part. I mean, it was said that when that someone came to Stalin at one point and told Stalin that the Pope objected to his brutality, and Stalin's answer was, "How many battalions does the Pope command?" So 50 years later, a Pope had a very important role in bringing down the Soviet Empire. A Pope, as a moral spokesman, pointed to the moral immoralities of the Soviet Empire, and that's what made the Soviet Empire collapse. So the question is, are there rules in history? Do you think that there are moral rules that govern nations, and that in somehow without thinking about an external God who brings frogs and gnats and the death of the firstborn, there are other ways in which kingdoms collapse? One last text before we conclude. So turn, if you will, to the end of the book. Take a look at chapter 9. This is a text that I happen to love because it was my haftorah and my bar mitzvah, and it's actually the haftorah for this week, for this Shabbos. So it's worth our reading it. Remember that the Israelites said to the prophet, and they would say to the prophet, first of all, prophet, what are you talking about? We're a prosperous city. We're a successful empire. Look at how we're doing. And then they would turn more plaintively to the prophet and say, prophet, we're God's people. Nothing bad can happen to us. God wouldn't allow something to happen to his people. So what's the prophet's answer to both of these? To verse 7 of chapter 9. To me, O Israelites, you are just like the Ethiopians, declares the Lord. True, I brought Israel up from the land of Egypt, but also Philistine from Kaphtor, and the Arameans from Kir. Kaphtor is Crete, and the Philistines are a Greek tribe that arrived from Crete. Arameans came from Kir. In other words, I move populations around all the time. Yeah, I took you out of Egypt. I took the Philistines out of Kaphtor. I took the Arameans out of Kir. You're just any other people to me, says God. Behold, the Lord God has his eye on the sinful kingdom. That's the only difference. I gave you a covenant of justice. I made demands upon you, and I'm watching you. Upon the sinful kingdom, I will wipe it off the face of the earth. That's a sobering prophecy on this day of celebration of Jewish sovereignty. It's a sobering prophecy. We lost Israel now twice. We lost it in 586 BCE when the Babylonians conquered it. We lost it in 70 CE when the Romans conquered it. And the question is, can we hold it this time? And here is the prophecy of that first one. Be careful, because I hold you account for your morality, says God. But every prophecy ends with hope. Every prophet knows that his job is not to smash the people, but to offer them some uplift. But I will not wholly wipe out the house of Jacob, declares the Lord, for I will give the order and shake the house of Israel through all the nations as one shakes sand through a sieve. This is the philosophy of salvation, but it's selective salvation. It's called pleta or she'erit. It's I will take the people, and this experience of exile that you will experience will purify you, because I'll separate the wheat from the chaff. I'll separate the ore from the gold. I will separate those who belong as part of Israel from those who don't belong. And not a pebble falls to the ground. All the sinners shall perish by the sword. Those who boast who shall never shall the evil overtake us or come to us. But in that day, when I'm done sorting you out, I will set again the fallen booth of David. The sukkah of David, the temple of Jerusalem, will rise again, and I will mend its breaches and set up its ruins anew, the dynasty of King David. And I will build it firm as in days of old, so they shall possess the rest of Edom, and they will be larger and more powerful in that day among the faithful. When the plow, a time is coming when the plowman shall meet the reaper, which means that no sooner have you gathered your crops and you'll plant them again, and you'll plant and you'll reap and you'll reap and you'll plant, and the treader of grapes, him who holds the bag of seeds. In other words, you'll be so fruitful and so fertile, but only after this experience of exile. When the mountains shall drip wine and all the hills shall wave with grain. And here's the prophecy for this day of Yom HaAtzmaut, this day when we celebrate the rebirth of the state of Israel. I will restore my people Israel. They shall rebuild ruined cities and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and drink their wine. They shall till gardens and eat their fruits. And I will plant them upon their soil, never more to be uprooted, for the soil I have given them, says the Lord. Let's pray that that prophecy comes true. I wish you a very good afternoon, a very good Yom HaAtzmaut. Join us, please, for further learning on this VBS channel, on this VBS page. Tonight, my conversation with the two young leaders of the Young Leadership Division of the Israel American Council, Yakir Englander, wonderful scholar and philosopher, Sophie Turkey Jurgen, who is a wonderful leader in this community, about what it means to be Israeli and American. Join us for that conversation tonight at 7 o'clock. Join us for Minyan morning and evening, and of course for Shabbat on Shabbat morning, Torah study at 9 o'clock. I wish you well. Hag Sameach. Take good care.